Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to talk all about the future temple in Jerusalem. This is going to be my most comprehensive video that I've done so far. I'm going to share everything that I have, everything that I know about the temple in Jerusalem that is yet to be built. I got this email from Debbie Jones. She also points out some interesting things in the May 2000 ensign about the Palmyra temple. So I'll show you that as well. I was going to do an update on what's going on in the world right now. By now, I'm sure you've heard about Hurricane Otis that hit, that hit Mexico, specifically Acapulco, as a Category 5 hurricane. And there's some interesting things about that. I have videos, but this video, I can already tell, is going to be pretty long, so I'll save that for another video. Before we get into the email, here is the Flood the Earth Challenge. I still haven't updated it. Believe it or not, it does take time to go through everybody's emails and comments. That's why I ask that you keep your messages short, so I can quickly go through those and update the tracker. But as of the last time that I updated it, we're at 7,177 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. So please keep it up. Remember that the channel goal is 10. Try to at least share 10 copies of the Book of Mormon. And we're trying to get to a total of 10,000. So, okay, let's go to the email. This is from Debbie Jones. Subject line, yet to happen. Third Temple, Jerusalem. Hi, Jared. I really enjoy your channel. Thanks for all your efforts, especially quoting from the scriptures and prophets. You got me thinking about what has not yet happened before the second coming. I've been trying to research the third temple that is supposed to be built in Jerusalem. I thought before the second coming. I was reading in Revelation chapter 11, verses 1 through 2. I'm sure you have the section memorized. And actually I don't, but I am very familiar with it. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court, which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Does that seem like preparation for the temple by measuring it, and not the courtyard area because it's going to be trampled on during the war? Okay, before I continue with her email, I want to show you what we have, or what's recorded in the Institute student manual. Actually, before that, when you click on the footnotes for these verses, most of them will take you to Ezekiel. Ezekiel had an extensive vision of the future temple with a lot of detail, a lot of measurements. And I'm going to show you, oh, there's a rocket attack. Just north of Gaza, just right on the other side of the border right here. We'll see really quick if there's going to be any more, or just this one. A rocket attack on Erez, just north of the Gaza Strip. All right, it doesn't look like it. Okay. So, Ezekiel's temple, there have been people that have tried to build models and kind of visualize what it's supposed to look like. There's this right here. This is like a craft or something that someone put together. Actually, not here. This is being used for a YouTube video, but I think this is the same one right here. So, but there's all sorts of different people that have tried to visualize what that temple is supposed to look like. And the way that Ezekiel describes it, it looks a lot like the first and second temples, but with some variations and different features. So that's what Ezekiel saw, but let's get back to this. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Institute student manual for the book of Revelation. This is for these verses that we just read. In the manual, it has a picture of the second temple. This is what the temple would have looked like at the time of Christ. Under that, it says, close-up of a model of the Jerusalem temple. In Revelation 11, verses 1 through 2, John was commanded to, quote-unquote, measure the temple, the altar, and the worshipers. This command can indicate that the temple and the worshipers are under God's protection. So I'm not so sure that it's a literal measuring that was happening in the book of Revelation, as far as like, okay, we need to figure out the dimensions of the temple, or anything like that. I think that he's saying this in a spiritual way. But continuing, it says, the angel told John that Jerusalem would be trodden underfoot 42 months. 42 months is the equivalent of 3.5 years. Likewise, the two witnesses mentioned in verse 3 would prophesy and testify of Jesus Christ for 1,260 days, or approximately 3.5 years. Now, really quick, it's important to note that in Revelation chapter 12, when it's talking about the woman and the child in fleeing into the wilderness for a certain amount of time, in the King James Version and other versions, it says that she's gone for 1,260 days, but the Joseph Smith translation changes it to 1,260 years. And we know that what's being referred to there is the church leaving the earth because of the dragon, and then coming back in the latter days. So if that's what that means in Revelation 12, okay, and that's what that represents, is the great apostasy, I think that's the right lens to use when looking at this. Okay, so let's continue. They would be slain, and their bodies would lie in the street for 3.5 days. In the scriptures, particularly in Revelation, the number 3.5 often describes a limited time of tribulation during which evil forces are allowed to do their work. Yeah, so that makes sense with the 1,260 years in chapter 12 and the Joseph Smith translation that changes it from days to years. It was a very lengthy apostasy. All right, continuing. Since 3.5 is half of 7, which symbolizes perfection and completion, it may represent imperfection and apostasy. It may also suggest that God will not allow evil to go on unchecked. Evil's time is bounded and its limits are set. So when we're talking about measuring the temple and measuring the part that's given to the Gentiles, I think it's mostly referring to these last days, those that are righteous, those that aren't, spiritual warfare, and so on and so forth. All right, let's continue. Okay. I was not sure if there are any quotes about the temple needing to be completed before the Savior returns. There are. And I'll show you that later because it's going to take up the bulk of this video. But before we get into that, let me read the rest of this email. Also, on another subject on temples, I wondered if you saw the news article that was in the Ensign, May 2000, titled 7 Temples. Interesting. Also, same Ensign, President Hinckley's closing remarks. He talks about the start of a new millennium. Thanks again, Debbie. So that caught my attention, and I decided to look up what she was talking about. So here it is. We're in the May 2000 Ensign, the article called 7 Temples Dedicated. All right, and I just wanted to show you a few highlights. I went through this whole thing, and there's some interesting things, actually, that I've added to my spreadsheets. So the first one, the Palmyra dedication came on the date marking the 2000th anniversary of the Savior's birth. That's because it was dedicated on April 6th of the year 2000. And the new temple is within walking distance of the area where the prophet Joseph Smith received the vision that heralded restoration of the gospel. This was the first time a temple dedication had been broadcast on such a wide scale. So I highlighted this because in the Ensign, in this article, it doesn't say the author of the article, but it's published in the Ensign, And this is yet another confirmation that the Gregorian calendar is correct. There's people that like to get into these esoteric, detailed things and be like, no, the Gregorian calendar is not correct. It's off by a few years. There were mistakes made. And I can understand why they would think that. But I just want to show you what I think is more authoritative. If we go to, where do I have it? Here we go. If we go to April 6th on my quotes A through Z spreadsheet, it has been said time and time and time and time again that we do have the correct calendar. And that April 6th literally was Christ's birthday. We have it from James E. Talmage right here in Jesus the Christ. We have it from Harold B. Lee. We have it from Spencer W. Kimball. We have it from Joseph Fielding Smith, Richard G. Scott. And now we have this Ensign article that talks about that fact as well. Even though it's not a general authority, again, the things that are published in the Ensign go through the correlation process to make sure that they're doctrinally sound. You don't have rogue ideas that get into the Ensign. And then the most recent to confirm this was David A. Bednar. I don't know why it's an issue for some people. I don't know. I don't know. But you have all these prophets and apostles that confirm that it is correct. I'm going to go with them because the most sure source of truth is God. Okay? It's not science. It's not our own reasoning. Science is incomplete. Our reasoning may not be the best, especially when compared to God's reasoning. And because these are prophets and apostles, and they receive revelation from the direct source of truth, I'm going to go with them. I'm going to go with them. And the position is that the Savior was born on April 6th, 1 BC. Why 1 BC? Because there's no year 0. So April 6th, the year 1 BC, he is newly born. A year goes by, and then on April 6th, 1 AD, that's when he turns 1. Does that make sense? So 1 BC, he's a newborn. A year goes by, and now we're in the year 1 AD, and then 2 and 3 and so forth. So this confirms that the calendar is correct, and he was born on April 6th. Okay, going back to this. Later on, President Gordon B. Hinckley, this is talking about the dedication of the Palmyra, New York temple. President Gordon B. Hinckley made clear the significance of the place and the building when he dedicated the new Palmyra, New York temple in 4 sessions on the 6th of April. He had said at the groundbreaking for the Palmyra temple on the 25th of May, 1999, quote, "I regard this temple as perhaps the most significant, in one respect, in the entire church. It was right here in the sacred grove where it all began," end quote. Now, I did not know about this, so I added this to my spreadsheet. Now I have an entry for the Palmyra, New York temple, if you want to find this later. And I have this quote. Okay, later, after that it says, "In dedicating the temple on the 6th of April this year, on the 170th anniversary of the organization of the church, President Hinckley said, quote, 'We have scarcely seen the beginning of what shall come to pass. These are the days of God's great work in the earth,' end quote." In case you take that to mean that, see, we're not even close to the second coming, he may not be referring to the second coming so much as the great work of temple work, of which there's going to be a ton of that in the millennium. That's going to be one of the primary activities during the millennium. At the beginning, missionary work, but then throughout the millennium, temple work. So yeah, in the year 2000, since the millennium hasn't even started yet, Yeah, it is only the beginning. All right, continuing. He spoke of the church's growth to nearly 11 million members, and he bore powerful repeated testimony that the church that the church organized by the prophet Joseph Smith truly is the church of Jesus Christ, and that the vision reported by the young Joseph truly did take place in a nearby grove of trees. All right, later on, I have this highlighted. Now look at this. While some 1,200 members were able to attend the 4 dedicatory sessions in the temple itself, it was estimated that nearly 1.5 million people, or sorry, it doesn't say people. It is estimated that nearly 1.5 million took part through live broadcast and tape delay rebroadcast to their stake centers across the United States and Canada. That is a lot of people. I didn't realize that it was that much. 1.5 million. Now look at this. This is really why I have it highlighted. There had been snow the day before the dedication, and the 6th of April began with heavy rain and chill. But bright sunshine broke through the clouds before President Hinckley. Oh, here's a rocket attack. Looks like it's this relatively the same area. First it was Erez right here. Now it's Zikim. Oh, now it's Nativ HaAsara. Are there going to be any more? I don't know. All right, let's go back to this. But bright sunshine broke through the clouds before President Hinckley and others arrived in the cornerstone laying. But bright sunshine broke through the clouds before President Hinckley and others involved in the cornerstone laying stepped out of the temple for that part of the program. After the cornerstone ceremony, when the church leaders had gone back into the temple, the weather turned blustery, leaving representatives of the news media commenting on the timing of the temporary calm and sunshine. So this is a new church-specific sign that took place. I have a spreadsheet, and I've done a video about this, of church-specific signs. So for example, in 1999, not even a year before the dedication of the Palmyra, New York temple, there was the downtown Salt Lake City tornado that took place, and it nicked Temple Square. It basically touched the temple. So you had that. May 31st, 1994, there was the unusual derecho in Utah the day after President Ezra Taft Benson passed away. And there's just a bunch of other ones too. Let me zoom out really quick. We have that really intense meteor shower that took place as the Saints were being driven out of Jackson County. That scared everybody in that area. I guess it was quite the sight to see. Anyway, I have a bunch of them on here, and this is the most recent one. April 6, 2000. A temporary calm and sunshine during the cornerstone ceremony. So I thought that was pretty interesting. If you want to see these other church-specific signs, you can do a search on my channel, or just come here to this spreadsheet. The link for my spreadsheets are it's always in the description box of every video. And the tab that you go to is right here, Signs, Church-Specific. Okay. Let's go back here. I'm not sure if there was anything else on this in this article. No. Okay, so there's that. And then she had said something about President Hinckley talking about it being a new millennium. Okay, so this is in A Time of New Beginnings. But this is by President Hinckley. He says, "We have been present and have participated in the proceedings of the 170th General Conference of the Church. We have for the first time used this great new building," referring to the conference center. "We have been here April 1st and 2nd of the year 2000, the opening of a new century and a great new millennium. There is something wonderfully significant about all this. It is a time of new beginnings." Now, I don't think that he means to say that the millennium has started yet. Like, certainly it has on our calendar, but we know that the millennium officially begins when Christ comes. But there has been a lot of talk about the turn of the millennium. And I know that because, let me go to my spreadsheet called timeline, phrases, Control F, millennium, there it is. All right, so this is a year-by-year tally of General Conference talks that include these words and phrases. So millennium has been used once this year. I'm still waiting for the Scripture Citation Index to update with this most recent General Conference, so that could actually change. But at least in the April General Conference, it was said once. So it's interesting because all of a sudden, from the year 2020 until now, suddenly every year millennium is being used. When you see this like big space right here between the year 2020 and 2004. So not much millennium talk during these years, and then all of a sudden it comes to life. Now, as you may expect, in and around the year 2000, there was also a lot of millennium talk. And you could take the path where you're like, well, of course, they're going to talk about the millennium because the millennium is coming up. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that could be. But whenever I've read the context in which they used it, they were really stressing how this is a big deal that we're moving into new millennium. And I feel like it's along the lines of what we just read right here. He says, there is something wonderfully significant about all this. And he's probably alluding to the fact that we're getting ever closer to the actual millennium when Christ comes for his second coming. So I added this to my spreadsheet as well. And I think that's all that there was. Okay. So let's go back here. Okay, so that we've covered the email, but we're going to go back to this part where she says, I was not sure if there are any quotes about the temple needing to be completed before the Savior returns. Okay, so now we're getting into the bulk of this video. And there are two rows that I want to cover. The first row is Jerusalem, future Jerusalem temple. And then after that, I want to cover Jerusalem, BYU Jerusalem Center, because it is my belief in my flexibility where I think that the BYU Jerusalem Center could be one or the temple of Jerusalem. A lot of people don't agree with that. They say they'll usually go to things like, no, it was never built for that. It's in the wrong place, on and on and on. We have an agreement that we're not going to use it as a temple, which as far as I can tell is not true. What I have found, I'm about to show you in just a minute, is that the agreement is that we're not supposed to use it for missionary work, for proselytizing, but it has nothing to do with what we can use it for other than that. That's what the Jews are concerned about. They've been away from the land for 2,000 years, and they're almost like an endangered species, essentially. There's not very many Jews throughout the world, and so they view it as an attack. So there's very strict laws and guidelines and stuff when it comes to proselytizing in Israel. But I haven't seen anything that says that we cannot use it for other purposes. But first, we're going to focus on these quotes about the temple. What has been said about the temple? Okay, so let's go to the very beginning. This is all in chronological order. Quotes to the right are older, quotes to the left are more recent. So the first one is from Scriptural Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. This is Joseph Smith speaking. He says, Judah must return, Jerusalem must be rebuilt, and the temple. Okay. In fact, I'll put, since it's on this row, I'll highlight that. And water come out from under the temple, and the waters of the Dead Sea be healed. It will take some time to rebuild the walls of the city and the temple, etc. And all this must be done before the Son of Man will make his appearance. All right. Now, we've talked about water flowing from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea and changes taking place around the Dead Sea. If you want to see those videos, do a search on my channel for Dead Sea. And there has been a lot taking place over the last few years. It seems like it is starting to happen. And that's how the Jews are viewing it based on the articles that I've read. And I interviewed a girl named Samantha Siegel. She lives in Jerusalem. She goes to the Dead Sea a lot. And she's the one that first noticed, officially anyway, she's the first one that noticed fish showing up in sinkholes near the Dead Sea. And I interviewed her. She's been interviewed by Israel 365. So things are changing over there. And they're discovering new like underground rivers or water flows that are going to the Dead Sea. So it's interesting stuff. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now this is important to understand. I'm not going to read this whole quote. You can find this in History of the Church, Volume 4, pages 211 to 212. And if you didn't know, all 7 volumes of History of the Church are available to you for free through BYU. So anyway, this is Joseph Smith, and he's talking about the fact that animal sacrifice is going to be brought back. Okay, and that necessarily that's connected with the temple. Let me show you what I mean. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, these sacrifices, as well as every ordinance belonging to the priesthood, will, when the temple of the Lord shall be built. Okay, and I can only assume he's referring to the Jerusalem temple. But anyway, and the sons of Levi be purified, be fully restored and attended to in all their powers, ramifications, and blessings. And again, if you're wondering if he's talking about literal animal sacrifice, he is. This is what he says right here. Okay. It is a very prevalent opinion that the sacrifices which were offered were entirely consumed. This was not the case. If you read Leviticus, 2nd chapter, 2nd and 3rd verses, you'll observe that the priests took a part of a memorial and offered it up before the Lord, while the remainder was kept for the maintenance of the priests, so that the offerings and the sacrifices are not all consumed upon the altar, but the blood is sprinkled, and the fat and certain other portions are consumed. Okay, but you can read this entire thing. He's talking about animal sacrifice and how that's going to come back, and he talks about the fact that the temple needs to be built. And so this is a clue as to what kind of temple it needs to be. Remember, there are different types of temples. Okay. For example, the 24 temple complex that's going to be built in New Jerusalem, all those temples have different purposes. They're not necessarily like temples that we have right now, where you go in, you have ordinance rooms, you have a baptistry. That's not necessarily the case with all temples. And so it would seem, if we're understanding this correctly, that the temple in Jerusalem would have the facilities or whatever is necessary, an altar for burnt offerings. But let me just continue with this really quick. So it may be asked by some, what necessity for sacrifice since the great sacrifice was offered? In answer to which, if repentance, baptism, and faith existed prior to the days of Christ, what necessity for them since that time? The priesthood has descended in a regular line from father to son through their succeeding generations. He's basically referring to the fact that this is not connected. This is not strictly connected with the law of Moses. Before the law of Moses was instituted, there was baptism, there was repentance before that time, and there was also animal sacrifice. We know that because Abraham did it all the way back to Adam. It's always been a thing. It's not something that's only connected to the law of Moses, although they did do it, along with the law of Moses. Okay, later, we have this right here. This is from Charles W. Penrose. And again, at this time, it doesn't seem like he was a general authority, but he he spoke in general conference. He did different things. So I'm not sure exactly what was going on. But in this case, this is from an article from the Latter-day Saints Millennial Star, September 10th, 1859. He later went on to become a member of the First Presidency. All right, so in here he says, the Jews, still in unbelief that Jesus was the Christ, will separate themselves from among the Gentiles and gather to their fatherland. Events will be so controlled by the God of Israel that they will possess the land again and build the temple in its former place. Okay, so this is interesting. Again, not that any one statement made by a church leader means that that's absolutely true and then it's doctrine. We should look for, if multiple people are talking about it, then that's probably the case, but we should still take this into consideration. He said that they shall possess the land again and build the temple in its former place. They will increase and multiply in numbers and in riches and practice the rites of the Mosaic law, looking for the coming of Messiah to reign over them as king. Okay. Next. This is by John Taylor. He ended up becoming president of the church, but at the time that this discourse was given, he was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And this is a pretty interesting little story right here. Okay, he says, in looking still forward, we find that there are other things ahead of us. One thing is the building of temples, and that is a very important item, and ought to rest with force upon the minds of all good saints. I remember some time ago having a conversation with Baron Rothschild, a Jew. I was showing him the temple here, and he said, Elder Taylor, what do you mean by this temple? What is the object of it? Why are you building it? Said I, your fathers had among them prophets who revealed to them the mind and will of God. We have among us prophets who reveal to us the mind and will of God as they did. One of your prophets said, the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple. But who may abide the day of his coming? For he shall sit as a refiner's fire and a purifier of silver. Now, said I, sir, will you point me to a place on the face of the earth where God has a temple? Said he, I do not know of any. And then back to John Taylor. You remember the words of your prophet that I quoted? Said he, yes, I know the prophet said that, but I do not know of any temple anywhere. Do you consider that this is that temple? No, sir, it is not. Well, what is this temple for? Said I, the Lord has told us to build this temple so that we may administer therein baptisms for our dead, which I explained to him, and also to perform some of the sacred matrimonial alliances and covenants that we believe in, that are rejected by the world generally, but which are among the purest, most exalting, and ennobling principles that God ever revealed to man. Well then, this is not our temple? No, but, said I, you will build a temple for the Lord, you will build a temple, for the Lord has, and I should highlight that. You will build the temple, for the Lord has shown us, among other things, that you Jews have quite a role to perform in the latter days, and that all the things spoken by your old prophets will be fulfilled, that you will be gathered to old Jerusalem, and that you will build a temple there. And when you build that temple, and the time has arrived, the Lord whom ye seek will suddenly come to his temple. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that. Sometimes I rush as I put these things together. Do you believe in the Messiah? Yes. Do you remember reading in your old prophets something like this? They shall look upon him whom they have pierced and mourn and be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. And one shall say, what are these wounds in thy hands and in thy side? And he will say, these with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Ah, that is in our Bible? Yes, sir, that is in your Bible. I spake to him then about the Nephites having left Jerusalem, and told him that the Book of Mormon represents them as descendants of their people, and that Jesus came among them, and that they, because of their iniquity and departure from the word and law of God, were stricken with blackness. Said he, what, as Cain was? Yes, sir, as Cain was. Said I, these people, the Lamanites, according to this record, a French copy which I gave him, being a Frenchman, this people are beginning to feel after these things, and they are coming by hundreds and by thousands and demanding baptism at our hands, just as you find recorded in that book that they would do. And that is given there as a sign that God's work had commenced among all nations. Said he, what evidence have you of this? This conversation took place in the Townsend house, and when the Baron asked me for evidence, said I, Sir, if you'll excuse me a few minutes, I will give you some evidence. And I went to Savage's bookstand in the Townsend house and obtained a photographic copy of David Cannon baptizing Indians, standing in the midst of a great crowd of them. Said I, here is the evidence. Well, what shall we do? Said I, you can do nothing unless God directs. You as a people are tied hand and foot and have been for generations. You can't move a peg unless God strikes off your fetters. When he says the word, the things spoken of by the prophets will be fulfilled. Then the measuring line will go forth again in Jerusalem. Oh, that's interesting. The measuring line. Then the measuring line will go forth in Jerusalem. He's probably referring to what we just read. I didn't realize that before in both Ezekiel and in Revelation. I'm going to highlight that. I like that. So this is probably an answer to your question. It's not so much like, yes, it's there's a literal aspect of it, of there being the temple, but the measuring line being like, measuring your works, your deeds, your soul. What side are you on? Like that type of thing. Are you with God or are you with the Gentiles? You understand? Okay. Then the measuring line will go forth again in Jerusalem. Sorry. Then your Messiah will come, and all those things spoken of by the prophets will be fulfilled. I mention these matters to Baron Rothschild merely to exhibit some ideas pertaining to the work in which we are engaged, and in speaking of the temple. Well, this is not the temple. No, not that you are going to build. This is ours, and we expect to build hundreds of them yet, and to administer in them in carrying out the work of God. So I'll highlight that too. No, not that you are going to build. This is ours. Well, I'll do that right there. Okay. So some interesting things here where John Taylor is talking about the fact that the Jews will build the temple. And I'll tell you what, it seems that there's a couple different opinions about who will build the temple, because as you're about to see later on, Bruce R. McConkie says that it's going to be members of the church that build the temple. I'm not going to be rigid on that, and I'm just going to wait and see what actually happens. If it turns out that it's the Jews and they build the temple that looks like Ezekiel's temple or whatever they have planned, then so be it. If it ends up being us, if it's like the BYU Jerusalem Center, so be it. If it be some other temple that's not one of those two options, then fine. Okay. But I think it would be unwise to put limits. Just read what these people have said and then just wait and see what actually happens. But I would not put the limit on the BYU Jerusalem Center because, like I said, maybe that will be an initial temple. Maybe it's going to be like an administrative temple, a headquarters temple. And then maybe later on, the Jews will build the large temple that's made for animal sacrifice and things like that. Who knows? Who knows? Uh-oh, rocket attacks. In Holon, which is just south of Tel Aviv. So this one is a little bit larger than the last two that we saw. Or it seems to cover a wider area. in more locations. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different places. All right, let's go back. Oh, it's still going. Now closer. Let me zoom out again. Now on the east side of Tel Aviv. Petah Tikva. This is a more sizable one for today. It doesn't seem like there's been too many big ones today. This might be one of the larger ones that I've seen so far. All right, let's go back. Okay, so let me take the highlight off this. So what we've read so far is that the temple needs to be, according to Joseph Smith, the temple needs to be rebuilt before the second coming. We've read about animal sacrifice, meaning, oh gosh, this is still going on. Now this one further south near Ashkelon, Be'er Ganim. Okay, so temple before Christ comes, animal sacrifice. According to Charles W. Penrose, built in the former place. And then what we just read from John Taylor, the Jews will build it. Again, I'm not going to say that all these have to happen exactly like this, because maybe somebody misunderstood. Maybe it's just, some of these people's own opinion. I don't know. But I'm going to say that their opinion is better than mine, if it is opinion. Okay, the next one. Now, this is also from Charles W. Penrose, but this one is found in the Journal of Discourses, volume 24, page 215, column B. And again, at this time, he's still not a general authority, but it would seem that he's speaking at General Conference. Okay, then the gospel, as I before remarked, will be preached to the Jews. Now, according to Bruce R. McConkie, the gospel going to the Jews will be initiated when Christ comes. And when you have that first initial conversion, and then it'll go on from there. So, I don't know. All right, continuing. The way is now being prepared for this. The work is moving on for the gathering of the Jews to their own land, that they may build it up as it was in former times, that the temple may be rebuilt, and the mosque of the Muslim, which now stands in its place, may be moved out of the way. Okay, so now Charles W. Penrose is being more explicit in talking about the removal, essentially, of Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock, or maybe just the Dome of the Rock. I don't know. Again, this could just be his opinion. I don't know. I still think that we should consider it, though. That Jerusalem may be rebuilt upon its original site, that the way may be prepared for the coming of the Messiah, who shall be seen in the midst of those whose ancestors nailed him to the cross, and who, when they see the marks in his hands, shall say in answer to their inquiries, "These are the wounds with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." Okay. Let's move on. This one is from Joseph Fielding Smith, Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 2, page 369. Latter-day Temples Foretold. That temples and temple ordinances are essential to the Christian faith is well established in the Bible. Malachi predicted the coming of the Lord suddenly to his temple in the day of vengeance in the latter times as a refiner and purifier. Ezekiel predicted the building of a temple in Jerusalem, which will be used for ordinance work after the gathering of Israel from their long dispersion and when they are cleansed from their transgressions. Now, by the way, this prophecy about the Lord suddenly coming to his temple, we've done other studies and videos into that, and certain general authorities have said that seems to have already taken place or is partially in fulfillment, because you can certainly apply that to when Christ came to the Kirtland temple. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Jerusalem temple, although that could be additional fulfillment of that prophecy. So that's something to keep in mind. General authorities have said that it seems like that's been at least partially fulfilled if not totally, but that it could also apply to when he comes to the Jerusalem temple. But I wouldn't make the mistake of saying that it's not fulfilled because it only refers to the Jerusalem temple. Okay, the next one is also from Doctrines of Salvation, but it's in volume 3, page 498. When Christ comes in fulfillment of this promise, there will be on the earth 2 great cities made holy with holy sanctuaries or temples. One will be the city of Jerusalem in the land of Judah, which shall be rebuilt. The other, the city of Zion, or the New Jerusalem, in the land of Joseph. Again, I must say, I don't want to move from this. Okay, well, all right, I will. I will say, like I've said a million times before, the Independence Visitor Center is not just a visitor center. It was built to be part of the 24 temple complex. That was the original plan for the city of New Jerusalem, meaning the center place. So we already have a temple in waiting right here. If you want to learn more about that, I have a playlist dedicated just to the Independence Visitor Center, which explains how we know that. But we have this right here already. It can be turned into a temple. We already have people in this area. There's a stake center right here. And the original plan for the city of New Jerusalem is it would be a stake. It'd be 15 to 20,000 people. So you have a temple, you have a stake, and then in the Kansas City area, you already have many members of the church, which was not the case if you go back decades. But as time goes on, more and more people are joining the church in Kansas City or moving to Kansas City. So with that in mind, and then as we go back to Jerusalem, and if I'm right about the BYU Jerusalem Center, then there's a temple in waiting already since the 80s in Jerusalem on Mount Scopus, which is on the same mountain ridge as the Mount of Olives. Here's the Mount of Olives. Here's the BYU Jerusalem Center. And here is the Temple Mount, which I have more to say about this later, because I had an interesting thought about the Mount of Olives splitting and that being in relation to the BYU Jerusalem Center, but I'll get into that later. Okay, now also in Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 3, page 511, Joseph Fielding Smith talks about the restoration of blood sacrifices. He says, "We are living in the dispensation of the fullness of times, into which all things are to be gathered and all things to be restored since the beginning. Even this earth is to be restored to the condition which prevailed before Adam's transgression. Now, in the nature of things, the law of sacrifice will have to be restored, or all the things which were decreed by the Lord would not be restored. It will be necessary, therefore, for the sons of Levi, who offered the blood sacrifices anciently in Israel, to offer such a sacrifice again, to round out and complete this ordinance in this dispensation. Sacrifice by the shedding of blood was instituted in the days of Adam, and of necessity will be restored. The sacrifice of animals will be done to complete the restoration when the temple spoken of is built at the beginning of the millennium, or in the restoration. Blood sacrifices will be performed long enough to complete the fullness of the restoration in this dispensation. Afterwards, sacrifice will be of some other character." So Joseph Smith talked about animal sacrifice coming back, and then Joseph Fielding Smith confirms it, but Joseph Fielding Smith adds that it's going to be done initially, and then later it'll be of some other character. So maybe it'll only be the harvest, like crops and stuff like that. I don't know. All right, next, this is from James E. Talmage. Remember, he's one of the big four. You have James E. Talmage, Orson Pratt, Bruce R. McConkie, and Joseph Fielding Smith. Those are the four that have gotten into these like more obscure, esoteric type concepts. where they like really try and flesh out different prophecies and stuff like that. And I don't think it's to say that, again, I don't know why that's the case. But what we have read is that the doctrine of the church is not hard to find, and it's repeated by many. So I still take what they say into consideration, but I think that you should be flexible, that maybe some of what they say is potentially just their opinion. But okay, so James E. Talmage, this is in his book called The House of the Lord, A Study of Holy Sanctuaries, Ancient and Modern, pages 43 to 45. And you can find this book on archive.org, by the way, it's on there. In the 25th year of the Babylonian activity, while yet the people of Israel were in exile in a strange land, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Ezekiel. The power of God rested upon him, and he saw in vision a glorious temple, the plan of which he minutely described. As to whether, now listen to this. Well, and actually think about this as well. It's interesting that at this time, they had only ever had the Israelites and the Jews, and then before that, the Israelites. All that they had ever had was the tabernacle, okay? And then after that, you had Solomon's temple that was built, but that was it up until this point. So the second temple, the temple of Zerubbabel, and then later referred to as the Herodian temple because of the renovations that were done, that was not even constructed yet. So he's already talking about the third temple in Jerusalem in the latter days. So that's kind of interesting to think about. But look what he says right here. As to whether the prophet himself considered the design so shown as one to be subsequently realized, or as but a grand yet unattainable ideal, is not declared. Certain it is that the temple of the vision has not yet been builded. So here we have a general authority saying that the temple may not end up looking like this. It may not have been the intent of the Lord to tell him exactly how to build the temple. There may be spiritual aspects as to what he was revealing to Ezekiel. Who knows? But James E. Talmage says that it may not actually be like this. There may be more going on to what he was shown. So if that's the case, then yeah, maybe it's not going to be like this. Maybe it'll look like one of our modern day temples. Or, like I said, maybe it's the BYU Jerusalem Center. Maybe the BYU Jerusalem Center will be left as it is, or maybe it'll be renovated, or who knows. So as you can see, there's kind of like a lot of uncertainty when it comes to this future temple. Like we have like little hints and glimpses into what it's supposed to be, but there's also just not a whole lot that we have that really nails it all down. Does that make sense? Let's continue. Okay. In most of its essential features, Ezekiel's ideal followed closely the plan of Solomon's temple. So close, indeed, it is the resemblance that many of the details specified by Ezekiel have been accepted as those as the splendid edifice destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. A predominant characteristic of the temple described by Ezekiel was the spaciousness of its premises, and the symmetry of both the holy house and its associated buildings. The area was to be a square of 500 cubits, walled about, and provided with a gateway and arches on each of the three sides. On the west side, the wall was to be unbroken by arch or portal. At each of the gateways were little chambers regarded as lodges and provided with porches. In the outer court were other chambers. The entire area was to be elevated, and a flight of steps led to each gateway. In the inner court was seen the great altar standing before the house and occupying the center of a square of 100 cubits. Ample provision was made for every variety of sacrifice and offering, and for the accommodation of the priests, the singers, and all engaged in the holy ritual. The main structure comprised a porch, a holy place, and an inner sanctuary or most holy place, the last named elevated above the rest and reached by steps. The plan provided for even greater exclusiveness than had characterized the sacred area of the Temple of Solomon. The double courts contributed to this end. The service of the temple was prescribed in detail. The ordinances of the altar, the duties of the priests, the ministry of the Levites, the regulations governing oblations and feasts were all set forth. The immediate purpose of this revelation through the vision of the prophet appears to have been that of awakening the people of Israel to a realization of their fallen state and a conception of their departed glory. So, who knows? The fact that it kind of like talks about it being more spacious and like basically just like better than the previous temple. Maybe it's referring to the fact that in the last days, there's going to be more people that are a part of the church, that more ordinance work is going to be done, that, maybe it's alluding to that kind of stuff. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see what actually happens. But we should take that into consideration. Okay, this is from Bruce R. McConkie's The Millennial Messiah, pages 278 to 280. And thus ended temple work in Jerusalem in the old temple with its Mosaic ordinances, in the temple whose work, like the law of Moses, of which it was a symbol, was fulfilled. And thus was it to be in Jerusalem until the promised day when a new temple should arise, perhaps on the very site of the old one, in which the gospel ordinances of the new kingdom shall be performed. Okay, so this is now the second quote, well, really the third one, but the second person that's making any sort of statement about where it's supposed to be built. The first two quotes were from Charles W. Penrose, and he definitely believed that it was going to be on the site of the original temple. Bruce R. McConkie isn't very concrete about it, because he says perhaps, but it seems like maybe he's leaning to the idea that it would be on the site of the old temple. So again, I don't know. They're the only two that say that. And is it just their opinion? I don't know. But I'm not going to treat it as opinion necessarily. I'm going to say, okay, well, they're inspired men, and so maybe that is the case. It's just that, again, it's better when you have more and more and more quotes. When it's very few, it's not that it's wrong, but it could just be their opinions. So who knows? The new temple shall be the one of which Ezekiel spoke. It will make a covenant of peace with Jewish Israel when they return to the ancient fold, saith the Lord. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, even the fullness of the everlasting gospel, which is in the new and everlasting covenant. And I will place them and multiply them. See, multiply them. So maybe that might be why it's more spacious, or what symbolically, metaphorically more spacious. I don't know. And I will set my sanctuary, my temple, in the midst of them evermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them. Yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel, when my sanctuary will be in the midst of them forevermore. This is the day of which Zechariah spoke. Thus saith the Lord, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies. My house shall be built in it, saith the Lord of hosts. My cities through prosperity shall be spread abroad, and the Lord shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem. And then shall the millennium be ushered in. For saith the Lord, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day, the day of burning, when every corruptible thing shall be consumed. In that day, in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall ye call every man his neighbor under the vine and under the fig tree. Who shall build this temple? The Lord himself shall do it by the hands of his servants, the prophets. This is Bruce R. McConkie that said that. Who shall build this temple? The Lord himself shall do it by the hands of his servants, the prophets. Behold, the man whose name is the branch, he shall build the temple of the Lord. And be it remembered, the branch is one of the messianic designations by which the promised Messiah is known. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his throne. And whence shall the workmen come to build the sanctuary? They that are afar off shall come and build the temple of the Lord. Who are those, quote unquote, that are afar off, who shall come to build Jerusalem, who shall come to Jerusalem to build the house of the Lord? Surely they are the Jews who have been scattered afar. By what power and under whose authorization shall the work be done? There is only one place under the whole heavens where the keys of temple building are found. There's only one people who know how to build temples and what to do in them when they are completed. That people is the Latter-day Saints. The temple in Jerusalem will not be built by Jews who have assembled there for political purposes as at present. Okay, so here, according to Bruce R. McConkie, it doesn't seem like you would have the Temple Institute who already have everything built for that temple. They have all the instruments ready, and they have the plans that would be used to build the temple. According to Bruce R. McConkie, it would not be them. Or at least, I don't know. If that turns out to be right, maybe it would be them, but it would be under the authorization of the church. I don't know. You know, for all I know, maybe the Lord did command them or inspire them to make all these things. They have all this stuff ready. Here's the clothing. Here's the breastplate that the high priest will wear. They made it again. They did this big study and figured out which gemstones to use, how to authentically reproduce the dyes that are used for the garments of the high priest and all that stuff. So I don't know. I could see any number of things happening. I could see the Lord having inspired this, and maybe these will be the actual things that are used when that temple is built. Maybe they will build the temple somehow. and then later somehow the church will come into possession of it and dedicate it under the proper authority. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. And I know that that's not a very satisfying thing, but I think there's a reason why we don't have very many details when it comes to this. I think a lot of what we read is correct and inspired, but ultimately how it actually happens, we'll just have to wait and see. All right, so back to Bruce R. McConkie. It will not be built by a people who know nothing whatever about the sealing ordinances and their application to the living and the dead. It will not be built by those who know nothing about Christ and his laws and the mysteries reserved for the saints. But it will be built by Jews who have come unto Christ, who once again are in the true fold of their ancient shepherd, and who have learned anew about temples because they know that Elijah did come, not to sit at a vacant chair at some Jewish feast of the Passover, but to the Kirtland Temple on the 3rd of April, 1836. And by the way, it should be noted, in that year, that was both Easter Day, and it was also, on the Hebrew calendar, it was first fruits, which Easter is basically just the Christian version of first fruits. I've gone into that before. The Jews have changed it. I'm not going to get into it. On that day, they were on the same day, and that's when Elijah came. To Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. the temple in Jerusalem will be built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay, so if that's true, call me lacking in faith, but I'm not so sure that that would fly under the current circumstances. I can't picture the church building a temple on the same spot as the old one under the current circumstances. Now, our God is a God of miracles, but he also does things in a practical way. And so if this is true, if it's the church that builds the temple, I don't see any problem in the BYU Jerusalem Center being that temple. It was literally built by our church. And I'm going to show you why it could be the temple, even though it's not on the same spot. Because Bruce R. McConkie cast some doubt or uncertainty that it would be on the same spot. Charles W. Penrose believed that it would be, but he's only one person. And there aren't any other quotes that I can find that say that it has to be built on the Temple Mount. That's why I have a problem with when anybody says, well, it's in the wrong spot. Because I guess that's something that's been said about the BYU Jerusalem Center. How does that person know? Like if you take Ezekiel literally, and I haven't read all the specifics in Ezekiel. I don't know if it says that it has to be on that same spot. I'm assuming that it probably does. But what if some of that is, what if it's not entirely literal, like what we just read from James E. Talmage? James E. Talmage said, well, it's not clear if he was being literal about all that. All the measurements and everything that he saw may have been more like a parable, or it may have been metaphorical. Maybe some of it's literal, maybe some of it's not. I know, believe me, it's very unsatisfying. It's hard to piece all this together, but maybe we're not meant to, or maybe it's going to happen in a way that we can't predict. I know that's frustrating. Okay, but anyway, Bruce R. McConkie, the temple in Jerusalem will be built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They that are afar off, they that come from an American Zion, they who have a temple in Salt Lake City will come to Jerusalem to build there another holy house in the Jerusalem portion of the mountains of the Lord's house. And perfect timing, rocket attack, as I finish that quote. And that's the last quote that I have about the Jerusalem temple. All right, this is in Ashdod. So, dang, I'm going to have to wait till this clears and once I can go back over the last 24 hours. But it seems like the frequency has kind of increased a little bit today in the rocket attacks. They're coming pretty close together. Another one near Ashdod in Nitzan Bet. Okay. So that's all that we have. We have what's said in Ezekiel, and whether it's literal or not, we don't know. According to Joseph Smith, it has to be built before the second coming, and water flow from under it. And who knows, maybe that's happening from the BYU Jerusalem Center because there is water that they've discovered, like new sources of water that are flowing to the Dead Sea from Jerusalem. I don't have the locations of that, but maybe it's coming from under the BYU Jerusalem Center. Who knows? It's the opinion, or it's been said by Charles W. Penrose, that it's going to be built on the same site. He even mentions the Dome of the Rock and potentially Al-Aqsa Mosque. Blood sacrifices are going to take place again. And these quotes seem to suggest that it would be in the Jerusalem temple. I don't see why that couldn't happen at the BYU Jerusalem Center. It could. According to John Taylor, it's the Jews that are going to build the temple. according to Bruce R. McConkie, it's going to be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which will include Jews that are part of the church, which has already, I mean, we already have Jews that are members of the church. Again, I did my poll. Let's see what the update is on the poll. I don't know if more people have taken it. Let's see, which tribe of Israel are you from? I'll put the link for this in the description below. It looks like, yeah, I think this number has changed. So I think some more people have taken the poll. 1,270 people have responded to this so far. Let's break it down by this. And again, we have Benjamin, Judah, and Levi. Modern day Jews are primarily descended from these three tribes. Some people question that for some reason. I don't know why. It's a well-known fact. Just look it up. But among the Jews, you have Levites. You obviously have people from Judah. And then Benjamin, because of its proximity to Judah, it was considered, or it had basically joined with that southern kingdom and remained with them instead of being carried captive by the Assyrians. And there's also Simeon as well. I don't know why they never mentioned Simeon, but Simeon was encompassed by Judah, and it's believed that they were essentially assimilated into the tribe of Judah. And here they are. Here they are in my audience. Here they are. And I can only assume that there's many more. If I only had access to all that data, then I'd be able to show you. Okay, now let's talk about the BYU Jerusalem Center. Here's a new concept that I present to you. Zechariah 14:4. Speaking of Christ when he comes to the Jews at the second coming. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. Okay. So it seems like the crack, I think that's what this is referring to. The Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Again, here's a visual, a real life visual of a Mount of Olives that was split earlier this year by an earthquake. Somebody made the comment, no, that's not what it's going to look like. I always love it when people are so certain that they know how things are going to look. I don't know where that authority comes from for some of you, but they were saying this cannot be it because it's supposed to be a valley in which you escape. I don't know about you, but I think that you could climb through here and that you could make your way through this valley. It might be difficult, but I don't remember the scripture saying anything about it being easy or being difficult. And by the way, as you're escaping a invading army, people with firearms, one thing that is useful is having cover. When you go to the army, you go through basic training, they teach you the basic concepts of concealment and cover. Concealment is like a bush, like it's not going to stop bullets, but it hides you. Whereas cover, it both hides you and ideally will stop bullets and other things. So this would actually be pretty handy if you have people that are chasing you with rifles and stuff, because it's hard to get through. If it's hard for you, it's hard for them. And on top of that, it seems like there's a lot of different places here where you can get cover. So I think it actually is perfect for running away from an invading force. But anyway, here you have this that took place. And I was thinking about where the BYU Jerusalem Center is and what this is all talking about. So it seems like the crack, the cleaving, is going to go to the east and to the west. So there's going to be like a cut like this, and then part of the mountain's going to go north, or sorry, this is south, part's going to go south, part's going to go north. And I just wonder, you know, if the crack would go so far as to maybe destroy this area. Maybe it's not the Lord's intention to rebuild here, because even though the temple did stand here, the two temples stood here at one time. they later became polluted and they became defiled. And so maybe this would be destroyed. You know, here's the Kidron Valley. So you already have a crack, or you have a valley that runs north-south. And then it seems like there's going to be one that's going to go east-west. All we can say for sure is that it's going to divide the mountain. Maybe the crack will stop. Maybe it will not reach all the way to the Mount of or to the Temple Mount, but maybe it will. But either way, the BYU Jerusalem Center could be right there near the crack. You know, say that the crack is right here. Say that the earth moves in different ways. Maybe it's exactly where the Lord wants it to be, close to where the splitting is going to take place. And even though this is Mount Scopus, you know, according to our modern definition, or I don't know how far back that you know, this has been considered a separate mount, but what if in ancient times, and you'll have to let me know in the description, in the comments below, maybe they considered this entire thing the Mount of Olives back then. Maybe the definition has changed. I'm not a historian. Maybe it's always just been this right here. But maybe in ancient times it included up here too, Mount Scopus. It's part of the same ridge. So anyway, that's something to consider, how the earth is going to change when the Mount of Olives cleaves in twain, because maybe a lot of things could get moved around in interesting ways. Don't know. All right, so let's go back here. Let's read these quotes. Okay, this is from Church News Archives. Okay, if you're wondering about if the BYU Jerusalem Center can be used as a temple or no, that's part of the agreement. All right, well, according to this is in an article called 49-year leases signed by BYU for Study Center in Jerusalem, May 21st, 1988. Richards said one of the concerns voiced by opponents to the center was that it would be used for proselyting for the church. There's supposed to be a paragraph there. Sorry, one second. There we go. Since the outset of the project, BYU officials have promised that the center would not be used for proselyting purposes, and that the individuals associated with the center will be asked not to participate in any activities that might be viewed as proselyting, Richards said. Students who do not conform with the provisions of the lease agreement in regards to proselyting will be dismissed from the program and sent home. The addendum to the lease also provides for a 5-member oversight committee composed of representatives of the Attorney General's office, the cabinet, the Jerusalem mayor's office, and the BYU Jerusalem Center that will review any planned public event associated with the center, as well as investigate claims of proselyting by BYU students, faculty, or staff. However, the committee will not have any jurisdiction over the operations or educational programs of the center, Richards said. This is a very key thing right here. Over the operations. The BYU Jerusalem Center long has been a target of criticism by outspoken leaders of ultra-Orthodox Jewish sects, who for several years have expressed fears centering on the proselyting issue. Most of the much publicized demonstrations occurred in 1985 and 1986. I didn't see anything here whatsoever saying that we can't use it for anything, even outside educational programs. The concern is proselyting. Now, what's interesting right now, really quick, let's see, BYU Jerusalem Center, Greece. We recently did a video talking about the fact that the students that were there have now been moved out of the country. My understanding is that they went to Greece. that's the video that I did. We read an article saying, okay, plan to return follows attacks and ongoing military conflict in southern Israel, which prompted BYU to move students from Jerusalem to Greece. And then the name of the article is BYU Jerusalem Center students returning home at the end of the month. So what's interesting right now is if this is the final war, and we only have days, weeks, months, maybe years, I don't know, it's interesting that the BYU Jerusalem Center has been cleared out, which I would imagine would be pretty helpful as you're getting ready to turn it into a temple. You know, there's been a clean cut where before we had educational activities taking place, classes and whatever, but now we're moving into a new phase. It's been cleared out. And of course, you're still going to have people that work there that, maintenance people and maybe some limited staff. That's not really anything. But that's an interesting thing to note, that it's been cleared out. And for all we know, maybe it's the Lord's preparations for what he's going to do with this building. All right, let's go back here. Here's another one. This is James E. Faust, The Light in Their Eyes, October 2005 General Conference, second counselor in the first presidency. I recently recalled a historic meeting in Jerusalem about 17 years ago. It was regarding the lease for the land on which the Brigham Young University's Jerusalem Center for Near Eastern Studies was later built. Before this lease could be signed, President Ezra Taft Benson and Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, then president of Brigham Young University, agreed with the Israeli government on behalf of the church and the university not to proselyte in Israel. You might wonder why we agreed not to proselyte. We were required to do so in order to get the building permit to build that magnificent building which stands in the historic city of Jerusalem. To our knowledge, the church and BYU have scrupulously and honorably kept that non-proselyting commitment. You have to wonder, why would the BYU Jerusalem Center be so important to the church that they would agree not to proselyte in Israel? And they're so strict about it. And I'm about to show you, I'll just show you right now. You have, there's a couple articles where Jeffrey R. Holland talks about the BYU Jerusalem Center and all the miracles that took place to make it happen. So, for example, in this article from October of 2019, he says, he talks about one miracle, and then he says, that was one of 33 miracles, large or small, that happened to make the BYU Jerusalem Center possible. You have to wonder why the Lord wants this building so bad. And I don't know, some of you might say, well, there's been a lot of good that's come out of it. Students have been able to get hands-on experience by being there. I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But that just doesn't feel right to me. I'm sure there's a lot of, like, the Lord, when he does things, he hits many birds with one stone, and that might be one of the birds. But for all the work and effort and miracles and special circumstances that had to take place for this to happen, I doubt that it was just for BYU students to have hands-on experience. And it seems like this was very, very important for the church. All right, let's continue. All right, here's a new quote that I have. This is from Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. This is from the Daily Universe, which I think that's BYU's like student or like campus, newspaper. Yeah, universe.byu.edu. So it's coming from this article right here. And this is a quote that I didn't have before, so this is new. He says, I don't know what it means, talking about the BYU Jerusalem Center. I don't know what it will mean in a generation after we're gone, or what purposes the Lord might have for it. In addition, Listen, in addition to university purposes. So he's making a distinction between what it was built for university purposes, and he's alluding to other purposes that are not university related. And then he continues, but my testimony to you is we have not yet realized its full potential. And the Lord has it there for an immense amount of good yet to be done. And that's it. Don't know what he's talking about. He may not even know what he's talking about, other than that's what he feels, or he may kind of know what the plan is. But you have to wonder, what does he mean by that? That it hasn't realized its full potential, in that it's going to do an immense amount of good. That it hasn't already, being used as this campus of BYU in Jerusalem. So he said that. The part that I didn't know was this part, the immense amount of good yet to be done. But I have another one here. This is from a different article, and it's basically the same thing. These are basically the same quote, but one article quoted part of what he said, and the other article quoted the rest of what he said. So this one is from Church News. He says, I don't know what it will mean a generation after we're gone, or what future purposes the Lord will have for it. But I hope students from all over the world can be blessed by it. My testimony to you is that the Lord wanted that center built and has it there for great purposes that we can now see only dimly. So he must have said, like, it's my testimony to you, like, a couple times. So let me just do it as though this is all one quote. Okay. Or maybe this is like two different occasions. See, this is from 2019. This is from 2019. Because, like, I don't know, maybe he gave like two different talks or something like that, where he basically said the same thing. Okay, so let me read it as though it's like all one thing. I don't know what it will mean a generation after we're gone, or what purposes the Lord might have for it, in addition to university purposes. But I hope students from all over the world can be blessed by it. My testimony to you is we have not yet realized its full potential, and the Lord has it there for an immense amount of good yet to be done. My testimony to you is that the Lord wanted that center built and has it there for great purposes that we now see only dimly. That sounds pretty serious to me, and I feel like that could easily fulfill this whole thing about there being a temple in Jerusalem before the second coming. This happened in a natural way, through practical means, in a way that has gone under the radar for those that aren't watching. There's always the people that always dismiss everything, that always want to minimize things. And I think that's very unwise, because you're not in a position to do that. Especially after you have an apostle that alludes to the fact that this is a very special building, that many miracles went into making this a reality. Okay, and then the fact that it's so close. It's so close to the Mount of Olives. It's basically right there. It's like a stone's throw away. It's like, look, Mount of Olives, Mount Scopus, it's right there. And like I said, this area is going to be moving around. Who knows to what extent or exactly in what way. We just generally know that this is going to go south. This is going to go north. Don't know exactly what's going to happen here. Maybe this will be destroyed. I don't know. But why couldn't that become a temple? Why? It would fit Bruce R. McConkie's words about it being built by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as well as Jews. Right? It is close to the same spot. It's not on the Temple Mount, but it's very close to it. It's within that vicinity. You know, a lot of this is kind of like, there's a lot of like open space around here where you could build an altar. I mean, you could build an altar right here in this area. Let's do BYU Jerusalem Center 360. Yeah, let's do this. Let's go to their website. Oh, I thought that they had some 360. Okay, no. Well, okay, let's go. Okay, let's do this. We'll go to photos, and then they have 360 ones here. They only have 2? Okay, well, we'll go to this like auditorium right here. And you can see, like, when you go outside, like right here through the windows, there's like this flat area. Why couldn't you build an altar out there for burning sacrifices? Why couldn't you do it right here on this like kind of hilly area? Like it'd be kind of awkward, but you could do it. You know, you could have an altar like this, and then it's just like you kind of walk straight onto the altar. I don't know. It looks like there's a bunch of outdoor areas around here as well. And this could be like an administrative temple where Christ rules from. And then later another temple built, maybe in the style of Ezekiel's temple. I don't know. Don't think it's a good idea to close off or to limit what the Lord has planned, what he intends to do, or to say that you know exactly how things are going to play out, because that is not likely. Okay, well, I think that's pretty much it. So that's all that I have as of right now when it comes to this temple. This is all that I have. If you know of any other quotes, please send them my way, and then I'll add them to my spreadsheet. But this is all that I've been able to find. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.